Hello, everyone. I will wait for everyone to get let into the room here. A moment, looks like we have people entering. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Diaz and I am with the NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. And I welcome you to today's CPI Innovation webinar on leveraging distributed energy resource capabilities through Transactive Energy. You can move forward to the next slide. I'll do a quick overview of NARUC as well as the NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. So NARUC is a nonprofit organization and we have members throughout all 50 states and territories, as well as FERC and FCC commissioners. And we can go ahead and move on to the slide. Our Center for Partnership and Innovation is a grant-funded team that is dedicated to technical assistance for our members. We provide relationships, develop resource, and deliver trainings and webinars, just like this one today. If you're not familiar with NARUC CPI, there is a fact sheet on our website. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce today's moderator. I'm very happy to introduce Chair Phil Bartlett from the Maine Public Utilities Commission, who will be our moderator for today's webinar. I will pass things over to Chair Bartlett.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. This is, I think, a really timely and important topic, as many of our states are really aggressively moving to renewable energy, which means a lot more variable resources we're bringing on the grid, both at the transmission and distribution level, and at a time when we are aggressively trying to electrify our heating and transportation sectors. But we really need to rethink how we manage our grid if we're going to avoid really exorbitant costs going forward, and try to make this transition as cost effectively as possible, and to make sure that we are really wringing the most out of our existing grid and all the renewable resources and other resources that we can bring online to reduce our carbon footprint. So with that, really excited to have 4 great panelists here today. I'd like to I'll introduce each one as they present. We'll have 10 or 12 minutes of presentation by each panelist, and then we'll open it for Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, please do put them into the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. Our first panelist today is Hayden Reeve, a Senior Technical Advisor with Pacific Northwest Lab, National Lab. Welcome, Hayden. Look forward to your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about a study we've just completed that looks at the deployment of transactive energy at scale across a large region. But before I do that, I just want to talk through the motivation. So if you go to the next slide, there's a key question: why coordinate distributed energy resources? And we see a key need to do this given the increased number of extreme events, the growing electrification through fuel switching, and the need to meet intermittent generation from renewables. And this has been challenging, this sort of supply side traditional way of operating the grid. Now, we are getting proof points that are really showing the value of demand flexibility. For example, in California in 2020, when they avoided additional blackouts during the heat wave. But these, this use of demand flexibility is quite often very manual. And we need to find a way where we can integrate demand flexibility day in, day out into the grid operation, ensure it's automated, ensure it puts the customers in control of how much they participate, and ensure they're fairly compensated. And so we see transactive energy concepts as a key way of doing this, but there are other ways of doing this as well. And I think you can view this study as an overall view of sort of the effectiveness and value proposition for demand flexibility. So if you go to the next slide, I just want to start off by talking through just an example of one type of transactive energy formulation. And it starts with different flexible assets, sort of understanding how flexible they will be for different value signals. So if you advance one more, So in a home, this might add up to the fact that when prices are cheap, you might charge your battery or charge your EV. Your water heater might jack up the temperature to store thermal energy in the water heater. And as prices get expensive, you may set back the thermostat on your air conditioning or discharge your battery, for example. And if you advance one more, this can then get aggregated and added up across all the customers, let's say on a distribution feeder or under a utility, to understand how demand would change with different incentive signals. And this can be matched up with the cost of buying electricity from the wholesale market to understand essentially an equilibrium price that would get the most value for everyone. If you advance one more, essentially then this price can be communicated back to customers and the different devices can automatically act on this. And so if you go to the next slide, under the DSO+T study, our question is, what would this look like if it was deployed at scale? Would it have good engineering performance is number one? And what would the economic impact be, both on a whole and to individual stakeholders? And to do this, we developed this integrated system model, which I'll talk about next. We came up with a sort of a retail marketplace design that integrated with an existing competitive wholesale marketplace. And the final element was to come up with a detailed economic model and evaluation to make sure we looked at the economics at the same level of rigor as the engineering performance. So if you go to the next slide, this slide is probably the most technical one, but I just want to give you a sense of the level of detail that was in this simulation. So it starts with the individual customers and their homes or their commercial buildings. We're modeling the thermal dynamics of these. We're modeling, air conditioning units cycling on and off, and the impact of changing thermostat settings, and really capturing the dynamics of the grid, modeling this at 15-second time steps. So if you advance one more, we then instantiate tens of thousands of different buildings and customer types to get the diversity of the types of customers we're seeing on the grid. And if you advance one more, this creates the bottoms-up sort of load we're seeing. So a physics-based model of the grid. And one more progression. This is matched by generation and dispatch. We're solving the unit commitment problem. So we're working out which generators would get scheduled day ahead, which would run in real time. And advance one more. And that calculates the wholesale price of electricity over time and across the grid. And one more advancement. And we can use that, that price to then send back and interact with customers, right? So if we go to the next slide, the benefit of looking at this integrated grid model is we can really understand the contributions and impacts on the different bulk generators, on how much power is then going through to the distribution system, the roles of different customer classes, and then the actual end load impacts, and the different contributions from different loads and their flexibility. But we wanted to make sure that in addition to this sort of engineering-centric view, we had an economic view as well. And if you go to the next slide, to do this, we actually sort of ended up modeling what we call basically the river of money, right? We wanted to create the Sankey diagram of the cash flow through the system. It starts on the left with the different customer classes. And so different customers have their monthly utility bills. In this case, the baseline sort of volumetric connection and demand charges. This covers the DSO expenses. They use that to buy electricity wholesale, pay their generation capacity market payments, transmission access fees, ISO fees, and then running the distribution system as well. And sort of understanding and putting these in proportion was really useful as we got into the results. So I'll show you a couple of example results on the next slide. This is a case where we had a lot of behind the meter batteries, and we were understanding how this could impact and reduce the load profile. And so the batteries are shown in the red line, and they reduce the overall peak by discharging at the peak load. and they fill in the valley. And in this case, they were doing about a 10% load reduction. In this case, we had a number of other scenarios as well, where we started to include solar PV, electric vehicles. We had a case with flexible air conditioners and water heaters. And we ran this through an entire annual cycle. But the key takeaway is we achieved the coordination we were looking for. The results were stable and effective from an engineering standpoint. If you go to the next slide, one of the benefits of then using the simulation results in the economic model is we could understand where we thought the economic benefits would come from and where the implementation costs would be, where they would show up for different stakeholders. And so as you can see here, there was a lot of benefits from reductions in generator capacity, market payments, but also benefits from, smarter wholesale energy purchases. And this is offset in some ways by the implementation costs, both by the DSO and then covering the costs that the actual customer would pay to maybe upgrade some of their devices to communicate with the grid. And so we do realize that we're fairly sensitive to assumptions about the capacity market. But even without a capacity market, most of our scenarios showed a net benefit as well. And if you go to the next slide, so I mentioned that we're sort of looking at these stakeholder perspectives. And so in addition to understanding the total benefit across the grid, we wanted to understand the benefit by stakeholder. And one of the advantages of simulating tens of thousands of customers is we could ask questions like how different customer classes would fare in this result. And so here is an example of the average annual utility bill savings of both customers who participated in Transactive and then customers who did not participate and stayed on a flat tariff. And participants would save more because they're sort of providing a flexibility service. But it was interesting to see, given our rate design, that non-participants also save money. And the key point here is they save money because the overall economic efficiency of the grid improved, the overall cost basis and affordability improved, and their rate design reflected that, and they saw those benefits. So if you go to the last slide, just to wrap up, I realize this has just been a whirlwind of the results from this, but I would invite people to check out, we have a full executive summary as well as a 1-hour webinar on the study that really gets into more details about this. I think there's a lot of good work there to understand sort of the economic impact on different people, the documentation of our detailed economic model. And really, I think another data point that these sort of demand coordination approaches both have engineering feasibility as well as a broad sort of economic benefit as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Chair Bartlett, and we'll be happy to take questions later on.
Great, thank you so much. Our next presenter is Claudio Lima, who is co-founder of the BEC Blockchain Engineering Council, as well as chair of the IEEE's Blockchain Energy Standards Working Group and their Blockchain Transactive Energy Initiative. Welcome, Claudio.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate. Hello, everyone. We are going to talk about the IEEE Blockchain Transactive Energy that we are leading. In almost is a strategic project from the Future Direction. So which is sponsor this project. So we are going to describe how blockchain can improve grid transactions, particularly from the transactive energy grid. Next slide, please. First of all, let's describe what blockchain is. So blockchain, in a simple term, is a time-stamped series of crypto data records. So basically, we have ledger and we have distributed computing. So that's how blockchain comes, and the ledgers are immutable, transparent, and traceable. So each block of data is secured and bound to each other by a chain of cryptographic hashes. So, and blockchain is just one simple term. So overall, we define blockchain as part of the DLT, distributed ledger technology is a much broader definition, and blockchain just one of the technology, which represent around 80% of the entire DLT space. Next slide, please. So another important definition is smart contract. So a smart contract is a simple piece of code that has computer logics that automates and executes what if conditions. So if you needed to automate the grid process, grid control, or grid transaction, basically we use a smart contract for that. So it updates transaction, it order a new transaction, like say if you are providing an order to buy or sell energy. So that's it goes inside the blockchain coding. So you can also run queries and you update the state base of the blockchain of the ledger inside the blockchain. So that's typical how a smart contract works. And next slide, please. So for the energy space, a smart contract is used for trading and transactions. So particularly we are looking for reconciliation settlement. So if you have a transaction that you have to place an order to buy X amount of kilowatt in a particular time interval. So, and then there are bidders and buyers. So then you have to provide the decision and reconciliate and then eventually do the settlement. So that's what we are doing here. So blockchain in smart contract is also extremely well applied to grid process operations. So if you want to operate your grid and substation, any control system you can do via smart contract automation. Eventually, it's extremely important as well to do the track and trace of grids, process, and personnel that control supply chain. We can do via blockchain and smart contract. So next slide, please. The basic property for blockchain it's track and traceable, so we can do data transparency. Everything is transparent. Auditors and regulators can see what's happening during the transaction. There is no intermediaries involved. It's tamper-proof. Everything you do, you cannot change. So basically, it's immutable. So all the record of the transaction is immutable. So you cannot go back and modify the record. And it's also good for data and user security. You can track who placed the order, when, and how. Next slide, please. And for the grid, we divide into, I would say, T&D, transmission distribution. So that's how you do grid control. You control elements in the grid. And for us, we are particularly interested in the customer-facing application, which is where we apply the transactive energy to sell and buy energy assets. And that's everything goes inside the smart contract coding, and is established and record in the ledger that is already in the blockchain. Next slide, please. So why blockchain can be used in transactive energy? So transactive energy is not new. We've been developed that for quite some time for market mechanism, measurement, analytics, and automation. The only missing link here we want to add is what we call the trusted decentralized environment. So blockchain is a way for you to create a trustability in peers and elements and nodes and assets where you don't trust. So you put that trustability, and then you have a blockchain enabling an important component for the grid. So that's exactly what we are doing under the BCT project. We are not reinventing the wheel. Basically, we are just adding one more layer on top of the existing transactive mechanism, which is the blockchain layer. Next slide, please. For that, we specify and standardizing data formats, consensus algorithms, governance models, cybersecurity, smart contract, and doing interoperability between different blockchains. So as I said, BCT is the Ieee framework. We are using that for the design and implementation of the DLT transactive energy system, and it's composed of a modular approach. So we are building block on top of block, and eventually is the intersection of power energy system, transactive energy, and blockchain. So that's the BCT is sitting right on the right spot in this figure. Next slide, please. What we have been doing the past 3 years. So we started this as a sponsored project, 2022. We have a position paper. We have a website. Anyone can go and review. we've been sponsoring different conferences with SIGRE, PS, ISGT, and there is a big one coming in November this year. We are building the architecture framework for transactive energy with blockchain. And eventually we are sponsoring and promoting what we call field demonstration. We have $150,000 to spend. Last year we awarded 5 prizes for startups, and anyone can apply. So if your company, utility, or startup have a particular demonstration on blockchain transactive, so you can apply. So the call for proposal is gonna be open next month. So, and then the major award will be given during this conference in November. So we are trying to stimulate the market, understand the gaps, and eventually apply some definition and improve our architecture. So that's the goal for the 10,000K per company or per award, and then that we are going to create kind of a generic model for that based on the IEEE demonstration area. Next slide, please. As part of the IEEE Energy, we also have what we call P2418.5. That's our standard. We have 200 people sign up. We have cybersecurity. We have smart contract use case. So we have very, very intensive work going there. And this is running from the past 3 years. We have lots of support for the industry regulator, and every year we promote a global event to discuss about the application of energy with blockchain. Next slide, please. And among those this. So we are looking for EV charging, DER, peer-to-peer settlement. So these are our use case that we are looking in our working group to apply blockchain in energy, and particularly in transactive energy. Next slide, please. And for that, we are building what we call a framework. So you see that there is energy transaction. You have a surplus from your solar or wind, and then you want to sell or buy, and then this goes through the normal grid, but eventually we want to register that in the transactive blockchain system. So you have an interaction with utility, regulators, DSOs, so you name it. So the idea is to be flexible, generic, and at the same time start building block by block. So that's the idea. So you keep the existing grid, but on top of the digital layer, you can add the marketplace and eventually the blockchain platform. Next, please. There are different types to see. So we classify the transactive energy with blockchain in 3 tiers. The tier 1 is where the utility, it owns, governs, and operates the system. So basically the utility owns the blockchain, the distributed ledger, so they invite participation, local market, so that is controlled and owned by utility. So there's an additional revenue source for utility. The second tier is where utility is one participant of the grid. They are not the major player, but also they are the grid provider, and they make money in doing that, and they can enable this blockchain transactive energy in a form of consortium. In tier 3 is more like the decentralized distributed, so it's for no regulated market. So it's more like when you transact peer-to-peer, and there has been a confusion in the market. In the past 3 years, we've seen maybe 90% of the case for transactive energy driven by tier 3, but we see that there is a strong motivation to go to tier 1 and to tier 2 in regulated market as well. Next slide, please. And finally, that's my last slide. That's what we are doing under the BCT. We are building the blocks of this transactive energy mode. We have the consumer node. We have the middle size level 2 gateway hubs, the collector nodes, and we have called the service node. And eventually that is DSOs, grid intersecting, interacting. We have a blockchain on this left side. So if you see everything I'm talking here is on this little box on the left side. So that's the blockchain platform. And every single process in the grid is registered and it goes to the ledger of the blockchain. So that's the blue arrow. Any single transaction is registered there, and then you can keep that record. So on the right side is the traditional way to transact, but the left side is the one we are adding as part of this blockchain transactive energy system. Next slide, please. And that's my email if you need more information. That's our website. We have The IEEE blockchain enable Transactive Energy's working group. So lots of activities happening here. So you are welcome to join. So let us know how can we invite you to join our group. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Claudio. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Larisa Dobriansky, who's the Chief Business and Regulatory Innovations Officer at General MicroGrids. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair Bartlett. And yes, I'm going to be discussing the regulatory side of the picture here, and also giving you a flavor for work we're doing within the Smart Electric Power Alliance. Through their Transactive Energy Working Group, we're developing actually a Transactive Energy regulatory paper. And we are looking at taking a holistic approach here. And also based upon what you've heard previously, looking at Transactive Energy as a means for moving to a new market, customer and data-driven regulatory paradigm. Next slide, please. You'll see I'm not going to go over this one by one, but I've designed the slides to address the questions that this webinar is raising through NARUC, and also, like I said, with focus on the regulatory. Next slide, please. Now, the definitions, there have been multiple definitions of Transactive Energy, but you'll see they're all broad in nature, like the grid architecture, Gridwise Architecture Council, system of economic and control mechanisms that allows the dynamic balance of supply and demand across the entire electrical infrastructure. Here, I'll be focusing though on the distribution system level, using value as a key operational parameter. This is meant for us working on this deliverable through SEPA, that we do need to take a holistic approach. We need to view Transactive Energy here as a spectrum running from prices to devices out to trading markets. And that also there needs to be an evolution of Transactive Energy, and one that is correlated with the agenda of regulators in terms of their grid modernization and achievement of their state policy and goals and mandates. Next slide, please. You can see a welter of drivers for Transactive Energy. I'd say those of us at SEPA working on this feel very compelling in terms of the convergence of the technology advancements, policy directives, changing market conditions, all moving us to more of a prosumer distributed energy future. These forces of change are increasing the levels of intermittent renewable energy, distributed energy resources in the marketplace, and evolving within growing digitalization, decarbonization, electrification. These forces of change are putting great stress on traditional grid architecture, the traditional distribution system model, as well as the legacy regulatory regime, which relies predominantly on administrative processes. These are not keeping pace, and these forces of change are calling for fundamental changes in regulatory responses to be able to meet these new power system, customer, and society needs. And we need to take full advantage of the smart technologies plus Transactive Energy to enable Transactive Energy systems supportive grid and market design and control engineering that is enabled by the smart technologies to gain visibility, forecasting, intelligent flexibility, the ability to integrate these new resources into the grid, enable consumers to become market participants, accommodate multi-directional power information and transactional flows. There's increasing proliferation of these smart devices and applications and systems. We need to have Transactive Energy plus smart technologies to provide the market mechanisms to coordinate and to manage efficiently energy usage and investment decision-making with respect to these intelligent devices and distributed energy resources. Next slide, please. This provides you examples of the great potential for benefits, and you've already heard that, from PNNL in terms of their study. But again, emphasizing how correlated Transactive Energy is to transitioning electricity systems to 21st century, in meeting 21st century challenges and opportunities, particularly with respect to applying transactive energy to promote efficient resource allocation valuation, to building a much needed, flexible, integrated, and adaptive grid to meet the new challenges and opportunities, to place demand-side load management in parity with supply resources to enhance overall balancing and supply and demand, balancing of supply and demand, to be able to better reduce, shape, modulate peak demand, to alleviate grid stress. Very importantly, harness the net locational and temporal benefits of these multi-use DER and intelligent devices, and to leverage new market active participation to deliver value. All of these are illustrations that together can work to reduce the barriers, reduce the burdens on the bulk power system, optimizing local energy to defer costly utility scale investments, increasing utility system asset utilization, building grid and community resilience. Not only benefits to the grid, but communities as well. In fact, enabling community-based decarbonization multipliers, where you'd stimulate cost-effective, higher value applications. Next slide, please. But this is going to require not just new rules of the road to bring about the actual market structures, their market processes, as the other two speakers have gone over. We need an enabling framework at the utility scale that can change the regulatory compact from both an economic, regulatory standpoint and market standpoint, to align utility financial interests with long-term customer value, reduce embedded legacy barriers, and to create new incentives that will level the playing field for all resources. In this way, we can support moving out of a distribution system level conduit mode to a distribution system operator active network renewable energy DER management mode, so that DSOs can effectively harness the net benefits of distributed resources to bring flexibility to generation, delivery, and use, and importantly, maximize efficiency, minimize costs of delivering reliability at all time locational scales. This will require an enabling reforms, transitioning from the reliance on administrative processes to transactive energy market-based solutions to provide efficient and reliable electricity sources and expand the provision and consumption of electricity services, as well as capture the value of these new resources. TE, the market-based solutions, can provide resource and system flexibility in integrating DER and VER, leverage customer third-party market participation to deliver value. And we've combined this with new regulatory innovations, very importantly, performance-based regulation to bring about this transition and to capture the value of these new resources, shifting from the legacy focus on historically incurred costs to forward-looking achievement of long-term customer value, bringing about equal treatment of CAPEX and OPEX to enable DSOs to optimize overall their expenditures and moving to multi-year rate planning. Next slide, please. We'll also need to develop consistent valuation, verifiable measurement, and monetization of DER as part of utility planning, procurement, investment, operations, and fundamentally evolving efficient pricing and charges, moving towards dynamic pricing, increasing spatial and temporal granularity pricing, and evolving rates based on marginal cost to the power system attributable to customers' energy usage investment decisions. Next slide, please. In addition to the economic regulatory changes, we need on the market side to build new rules to develop capacity, market capacity, customer engagement, building upon changing these utility risks and rewards, and building upon increasing our reliance on cost reflective, more accurate economic and price signals that can motivate investment operational decision-making, as well as price responsive customer behavior. It's building capacity for market engagement that can modify consumer behavior using new technologies and analytics, but all consistent with advancing still our valued our values of reliability, affordability, safety, and equity. This involves, though, designing new market rules of the road and mechanisms that can value system-based investments and operational protocols to make this shift out of a reliance predominantly on administrative processes to a customer-driven market orientation, moving from focus on asset development to value creation, from a focus on singular focus on a homogeneous commodity delivery to heterogeneous service delivery within an evolving integrated grid. And this will require increasing transparency, reducing information asymmetries. Next slide, please. Very importantly, you're hearing market platforms. This can relate both to development of such multi-sided market platforms by utilities and non-utilities, and market platform both from the standpoint of an operational structure as well as a platform that can connect, interface with these distributed energy nodes and prosumers to enable, communicate with them, send price signals, have this back and forth to enable energy services. The market-sided market platforms can be essential here as a means for transitioning out of the singular focus on homogeneous commodity development to heterogeneous service delivery, and be an essential means for actually evolving the customer maturation process in terms of moving from passive consumer to pro-consumer to even prosumer. Next slide, please. So you see how it isn't just how to set up and drop in transactive energy into the marketplace. It is integrally related to grid modernization and the cost-effective achievement of state policy goals and mandates. And it can both be shaped by the grid and shape a new grid operating system, evolve an integrated grid that can bring about integration within utility planning, investments, operations, support end-to-end interoperability, expand market players, and within these evolving new economic, regulatory, and market frameworks to support cybersecure, physically resilient grid architecture that would be more highly flexible, configurable, modular, interactive, as well as to support ultimately grid design to leverage local integrated energy development use. Next slide, please. I'm moving to the finish line, Chair Bartlett, I am. One more before this. I'll go very fast. This in turn will shape a new utility distributed system model that is anchored in proactive distribution network management, utilizing to a fuller extent smart technologies to evolve advanced distribution system and to evolve and leverage grid compatible and market participation protocols that can facilitate this TE decentralized dispatchability and ultimately peer-to-peer transactions, producing overall, evolving overall a customer and data-driven services-oriented model. Next slide, please. And I'm moving to the last two. This would have big implications for regulatory roles and responsibilities. The main premises need a more proactive role by regulators, consistent, of course, with their public utility codes, legislative mandates to address barriers, delineate enabling frameworks, and create the environments that are conducive to taking into account all relevant stakeholder interests, balancing those interests, and promoting alternative analysis towards facilitating managing risk and uncertainty based on forward planning, application of new tools and methods in utility planning and decision-making, facilitating transitioning to a 21st century grid and market based on active network operating management, but also improving, enhancing stakeholder processes using a wider range of regulatory venues for regulators to access all sources of technical assistance, together working towards supporting holistic strategies, public-private partnerships, retail wholesale alignment, and as well electric industry and community cooperation. Last slide, please. Critical to this is regulatory support for TE sandbox demonstrations that can utilize these excellent efforts you're already hearing about to apply new modeling simulation tools to demonstrations, help to evolve uniform, consistent, verifiable evaluation methods, apply like IEE, IEC standards to demonstrations, and gain technical assistance so that regulators can identify, see how to stage, sequence, and establish key performance criteria for such TE pilots that can then inform their transitioning with respect to their grid modernization, state policy, mandate, decision-making processes. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. And our last speaker before we head into the Q&A session is Ieee Shaken, who's the lead strategy analyst for National Grid's Future Electric team. Welcome.
Great, thank you, Chair Bartlett, and thank you to the other speakers. Larisa in particular commented on several sort of underpinnings for what I'll talk about, just related to where the distribution utilities fit into this picture and what some of the realities of just how quickly and how we can accommodate transactive energy based on the way that we're regulated. So some really good order to have her go right before me. If you could jump to the next slide, please. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about specific examples of transactive energy like programs and initiatives at National Grid. And I have a couple slides that will speak to that. Before we get there, just a little bit of level setting about who National Grid is and what territory do we serve. So National Grid we're a global energy company. Today I will be speaking about our regulated electric and gas utility business in the United States. I specifically support our electric business on the New York and Massachusetts side, where we serve millions of customers. And just for everyone's awareness, I know utilities can take different shapes and different forms depending on the jurisdictions in which they operate. But we operate in deregulated energy markets. So competitive wholesale markets with New York ISO and ISO New England, and we have competitive retail supply as well. Next slide, please. And fitting with the jurisdictions in which we operate, we're seeing really quite an explosion of DER on our distribution system across our U.S. service territories, where we're among the most densely populated with DER in the U.S. and DER are really core to the way that we envision decarbonizing our energy network. So on the slide, I have some metrics and stats related to the company's existing and as well as our targets for solar, distributed solar deployment, energy storage, electric vehicle adoption, electric heat pump adoption. Those collectively fit into this category of beneficial electrification, which I'll talk about in the coming slides. And what we see, I'll speak a little bit to the bottom section around pricing, is that we have some really effective public policy in the states in which we operate that provide strong price incentives to really kickstart a good market for DER, and we're enjoying all the benefits of that on our distribution system. Where the transactive energy starts to come in is the pricing to not just get those DER installed, but also pricing to help shape how those DER are operated, particularly the ones that have some flexibility. And if you could jump to the next slide, please. And that's where this transactive energy concept comes in. Just a little bit of a disclaimer. I know that Larisa showed several different definitions of transactive energy. There's lots of different ways that folks talk about transactive energy and how they define them. A bit of a disclaimer. We at National Grid, we don't have a specific company-wide sort of endorsed definition of transactive energy. But for purposes of this discussion, I'll speak to some attributes that we think are relevant in some of the programs and initiatives that we're working on, which include highly flexible and price responsive DER, bid-based market clearing mechanisms that set prices and quantities for those DER grid services, and this idea that you can use those DER to address multiple use cases, right? So it can be responsive to wholesale price signals. It can be responsive to local grid needs or, that are administered by their retailers and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Great. And as far as where it fits in, potentially where does transactive energy fit into the way that we operate our energy network and how we think about the potential role of dynamic pricing playing an increasingly important role in how we operate in our energy network. Starts to come together when we think about all the challenges that we see with the clean energy transition. So if we think back to a couple slides ago, I showed all the DER, not only the DER that's already been installed on our distribution system, but also the DER that we expect. We have sort of option one on the left side of the screen, which is you accommodate all of the load growth and the distributed generation growth with existing tools, so to speak, right? Which is you build out more infrastructure because you don't have necessarily the rates and the pricing or the tools in the toolbox for your distribution system operators or even for your settlement and billing folks to be able to do more than that, right? So you build out a really robust grid infrastructure that can accommodate power flows in all hours and can handle the super light loads that we see from solar PV and some of the peak load growth that we could expect if we leave if we don't have the right sorts of pricing signals to help shape electric vehicle charging and electric heat adoption. And that's a potentially a pretty expensive version of that future versus on the right as we think about some of the opportunities that are emerging as a distributed system operator and how we can potentially use pricing as one of several tools to help manage power flows on our system and help take those DERs from being oh, let's just accommodate those DER to actually integrating those DER to provide grid services. That's what we start to think about on the right side of the screen. And the timing is starting to come together from a technology perspective as well. So what we're seeing is that there's more adoption of manageable, flexible devices on the distribution system. So I've got a little icon for a smart thermostat and an electric vehicle charging station. Larisa mentioned some of the grid modernization efforts. We're getting to the point at National Grid as well where we're continuing to invest in new grid capabilities such as DERMS, ADMS, advanced metering deployments across our service territory that will fundamentally change the way that we're able to manage and track DER that are and coordinate across DER that are participating in a variety of different potential pricing and pricing programs. And kicking some pace into all of this, of course, is new regulatory mandates like FERC Order 2222. We operate in NYISO, who previously had a DER aggregation model that was approved even prior to Order 2222. So we're seeing some new opportunities emerge in the wholesale markets as well. And consistent, with what Larisa said as well, which I thought was spot on, but it's, the question I think we have at hand that my team focuses on quite a bit at National Grid is, how do we, shape the operation of those DER based on this idea that we have DER that are located at all different sorts of customers. Those different DER reflect underlying different customer preferences, and they take different shapes and forms, and they can participate in a variety of services, right? Wholesale distribution services, societal services, and meet behind the meter customer needs if they're located behind the meter. Next slide, please. So I took a stab at, this is quite a few programs that I would say sort of fall into this price responsive, flexible DER sort of space. And what I've done is I've listed them off to the side. I won't go through all of them one by one, but just to make things a little bit more visually appealing, I've tried to categorize them into a few different buckets on the right side of the screen. And it's really, it's more so a spectrum, right? So I'm using these sliders to evaluate, different initiatives at the company and to assess, where they fit, in terms of first looking at, what sort of use cases are these programs being used to meet? Are they programs that are primarily dispatched to, reflect like wholesale level or system level, conditions like a system peak demand response program? such as like our existing connected solutions programs, which are very well subscribed and popular programs, or are they programs that are more so designed to reflect local system needs, like local distribution constraints on a particular distribution feeder? Or is it a program that's designed to do both? So it takes different forms. As far as the pricing, several of our existing programs in this space use, essentially used fixed pricing, where it's, it's sort of binary. It's either an event or it's not an event, but your pricing doesn't actually change based on, what the relative, event is, if that makes sense. Whereas other programs, the pricing, might vary on an hour-to-hour basis. So think about, item 6 is, integration of DER into the wholesale market. Wholesale markets use hourly and sub-hourly pricing. So it's a very dynamic price. In terms of dispatch, most of the programs I've listed here involve some form of active dispatch. We do have, retail tariffs that we support today. So I mentioned like the New York one, which is item 3. It's this value for DER value stack. Resources aren't actually dispatched to provide those services. They just get paid based on the applicable price during that hour. Sort of akin to, like, if folks are familiar with ISO New England, they have a settlement only generator sort of model as well. So there's no dispatch there. As far as enrollment, varying levels of enrollment. As you can see, some of the good actors in terms of dynamic pricing and active dispatch maybe have low enrollments. So as we add more complication to some of these programs to make them perhaps more granular, finite tools that can help us actually resolve specific distribution system constraints, those programs or products, may get a bit more complicated, and they may not necessarily align with existing business cases for some of the potential market participants. And then a last piece that's come up on some of the prior discussion from the other presenters is around bid-based pricing and being an important theme. Some of our programs do have some form of bid-based pricing. It's not at the level of what's sort of envisioned of this individual devices determining their own price and really building out essentially a full sort of supply curve, or a demand curve of different sorts of prices at which certain DER might be willing to curtail or not curtail. But yeah, it's we don't have a single program that has all the way on the right for each of these boxes yet, across one. I have one more slide that I'll jump to, please. Just to wrap things up, I think Larisa covered this as well, but we really see Transactive Energy as a journey more so than a destination right now. We're in the relatively nascent stages where we don't have like a specific company definition that we can all agree on at this point. We are continuing to explore concepts that and programs that certainly fit within this space, as we discussed in the prior slide. But to really understand and expand, potential transactive energy concepts as being something that the distribution utility should really focus in on, we have to do some additional, testing to really understand, where can this be, cost-effective and reliable as a grid solution and for our customers to create value for our customers. One other piece as well, and this is an important thing that we think about a lot in the distribution system is, it's a big difference from the wholesale sort of picture where we see transactive energy. At the wholesale level, it's much broader geography, right? So therefore you can have, in a lot of ways, a bit of, you're de-risking your network operation because you have a lot of different power plants, that can, or resources that can provide, services, to meet a particular constraint, in many geographies. On the distribution side, we have to, depending on what the use case is for, potential transactive energy like programs, you lose a little bit of that. You have to have enough of a customer base to sort of diversify the risk profile sometimes. So if you're looking at really kind of finite distribution level constraints, it may not be that helpful if there's only one customer in that location who's capable of providing a flexible service. So we have to make sure that there's the proper level of participation. And then the last piece here, which Larisa covered extensively, just relates to some of the regulatory approvals and making sure that we have the right cost recovery mechanisms to pursue these things and the right incentives in place to really make these programs go. So I'll close there. Chair Bartlett, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you. And I guess at this point, I'd ask all our panelists to turn on their videos, and we could probably take down the slides. There are a few questions that have come in, and we'll do our best to get to them. The first is the question asking, how prepared are the ISO and RTOs for this, and in what timeline is it going to, what's the timeline for really seeing this in real time? And I would ask just a related question in terms of how much of this can be incentivized or needs to be incentivized through the wholesale markets, capacity markets, or otherwise, and how much do we need to make changes on the retail side to help drive this? And open that to anyone who would like to respond.
I guess I'd have a quick reaction. I think that this is where the FERC orders and most recently the 2222, I think, are valuable to provide the push for everybody. But I think they're laying the building blocks. So I don't see this as like an overtake by the wholesale over the distribution. And in fact, I think where we'll get our greatest value is differentiating but harmonizing the two, evolving over time. And that they're just, as you can tell from our discussions today, there are just such unique, distinctive benefits that come from Transactive Energy increasing and building the retail market capacity and participation at the distribution system level. That's where we can capture new value that we haven't in the past, and that's critical to our grid modernization efforts and achieving cost effectively the state policy goals and mandates.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that question before I move to the next?
Yeah,
I would just, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please.
I would just add, in terms of the bits and pieces needed, we're seeing movement where some utilities like, ComEd do have dynamic prices. California is moving with the MIDAS system to send out machine readable prices to customers, starting with time of use. So we're seeing some movement in that direction as well.
Great. The last thing I was just going to add was, I touched on this a little bit, but there will continue to need to be coordination between, wholesale level sorts of markets and what's happening on the distribution system, because we could have, especially with some of the beneficial electrification loads like, heat pumps and EVs and energy storage, it could be the case that we have very different conditions on a specific part of our distribution system than what the wholesale signal might be saying. Particularly as these sorts of adoptions of those types of loads, will happen at different places at different times. So it's definitely something that we need to, there needs to be coordination regardless.
I want to get to one more question that was asked in the question and answer. And that is, during Eli's presentation, this came up, but it's probably a broader, many of you may answer it. In terms of pricing, how much of the pricing really is going to depend on the DER technology or service provided? How much of it is really about the customer? And they talk about the potential differentiation between simpler customers who may benefit from a sort of fixed pricing model versus more sophisticated customers that may be able to respond. And building on that, to what extent are we just relying on technology that will enable even, customers that don't have either a high level of sophistication or interest to take advantage of the potential savings? So I'd open that to anyone, maybe start with Eli and then others.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, one that we think about a lot. It's exactly right. So it's a little bit of both, right? Like if you're developing a pricing, like I think about time of use, this question makes me think about time of use rates. And if you're giving a really complicated rate to a specific set of customers, like residential customers, for example, or perhaps low income customers, you're putting them on a rate without the right tool set for them to succeed with that rate and then enjoy the benefits. That's a non-starter. So I think that, complicated rate structures probably need to be paired with, the proper tools, whether it's automation tools to help them succeed. But as far as like pricing, like there's very different pricing models. Like what I'm describing is still like what I would call administratively determined pricing, right? Which is like utilities determine a price and push it down, to customers. On some of these more future-facing market platforms, the idea is that it's bid-based pricing, where you do have, DER customers that perhaps are more sophisticated or they work with some sort of aggregator who can help them manage the complexity. But you're coming to, like a market clearing price, that's determined based on, what those customers can deliver.
I just add one quick thing. I believe there's another dimension as we move along the continuum from prices to devices out to market trading. There's the dimension of the actual market design and structure that should support accurate pricing signals and support the liquidity of the market so that you reduce the spread between buying and selling, and you're really conveying accurate price signals. So the market structure and design aspect is critical as well.
Thank you. And I'm sorry that we're going to have to close out the question and answer there. These were, I think, fascinating presentations. I think they bring up a lot of interesting issues that we could definitely use a lot more exploration. So I want to thank the panelists and turn it back over to Jessica for a quick wrap up. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to our moderator and speakers today. I'm sorry that we didn't have quite as much time for Q&A, but you have all of their information on their slides, which will be posted on the NARUC Innovation and Innovation webinar page by the end of the week. So feel free to contact them with any individual questions you may have. I would just want to say a quick thank you both to everyone who joined us today, as well as the U.S. Department of Energy for its support of the CPI Innovation webinar series, and give you a little bit of information about our upcoming webinars. Usually they happen one Thursday each month from 3 to 4 p.m. But I just want to make note that our next one will actually be on a Wednesday, May 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. And it should be an interesting webinar. It's a panel highlighting university-sponsored energy innovation centers. And then you can find the dates for our upcoming spring and summer webinars on this slide as well. And there will be more information on those webinars on the CPI Innovation webinar page. Thank you all for joining us today.